"Sir, step away from the counter. Please, don't sign anything yet." She said it so quietly I almost didn't hear her. A young woman behind the bank's service desk, maybe 28 years old, leaning slightly forward with her hand almost touching my arm. Her name tag said Brianna. Her eyes were darting to my left, toward my nephew, who was standing about 6 feet away, scrolling on his phone, pretending not to pay attention to either of us. I looked at her. She looked at me. And in that half second, something passed between us that I still can't fully explain. Not words, not a signal, just a kind of quiet alarm, woman to stranger, the way you might warn someone they're about to step off a curb into traffic. "I need to use the restroom," I said, loudly enough for my nephew to hear. "Daniel, I'll be right back." He looked up from his phone, smiled. "Take your time, Uncle Walter. We've got all morning." He had no idea that morning was about to become the last morning of his plan. "My name is Walter Grayson. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a cardiologist at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and when I retired 4 years ago, I did so quietly and without ceremony, the way I've always preferred to do things. No party, no plaque on the wall, just a Tuesday afternoon when I turned in my badge, drove home, and sat in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the house. My wife, Margaret, died 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. We had no children, a choice we made deliberately in our 30s, for reasons that felt right then and still feel right now. We were enough for each other. We built a life that was full without being crowded. When she died, I kept that life running as best I could, because I thought that was the most respectful thing I could do with the time she didn't get to have. I owned the house outright. I had a pension. I had investments that Margaret and I had built slowly over decades. Nothing flashy, nothing speculative, just patient and careful accumulation the way her father had taught both of us. Somewhere around $2.4 million, all told, spread across accounts, a trust, and the house itself, which sat on 3 acres outside Westerville and had been appraised most recently at just over $800,000. I say this not to boast. I say this because this is the reason Daniel came back into my life when he did. Daniel is my sister, Patricia's son. Patricia and I were never especially close. She's 12 years younger than me, and we grew up in the same house, but somehow in different worlds. She moved to Phoenix when Daniel was in middle school, remarried twice, and we settled into the kind of relationship where we remembered each other's birthdays and not much else. Daniel I knew even less. He had visited with Patricia a few times when he was young, a quiet kid, I remembered, who liked video games and didn't make eye contact. I hadn't seen him in person since Margaret's funeral, where he stood in the back row with his phone half visible in his jacket pocket. So, when he called me in January, 2 years ago, I was surprised. When he said he'd moved to Columbus for work and would love to reconnect, I was cautiously pleased. When he started showing up on Sunday afternoons and eating dinner at my kitchen table, I let myself feel something I hadn't expected to feel. Grateful, genuinely, honestly grateful for the company. He brought his wife, Rachel, most times. She was pretty in a calculated way. The kind of pretty that comes from effort and presentation rather than ease. And she had a laugh that surfaced reliably at whatever I said that seemed like it might be funny. She called me Uncle Walter from the first visit, though I'd never offered the title. It felt presumptuous but also warm, and I was lonely enough that I chose to read it as warm. Through the spring and into summer, they came every week, sometimes twice. They helped me with small things around the house. Daniel fixed a gutter. Rachel organized the pantry without being asked. They brought food sometimes. Lasagna, once. A pie from a bakery near their apartment. I knew I was being courted, the way you always know somewhere in the back of your mind, even when the front of your mind is choosing not to look at it. I'm a doctor. I have spent decades reading people in high-stakes moments, watching for the signals the body sends when the mouth is saying something different. I knew what Rachel's too wide smile meant. I knew what it meant when Daniel started asking careful, indirect questions about my accountant, my attorney, my health. I knew. I just didn't know how far they were willing to go. The first concrete thing happened in March of last year. I had a routine appointment with my physician, Dr. Anita Patel, a woman I've known professionally for 15 years. She's thorough and plain-spoken, which are the two qualities I most respect in a doctor. During the visit, she mentioned, almost in passing, that she had received a request from someone claiming to be coordinating my care, asking for a summary of my cognitive health and whether I had shown any signs of memory impairment. I didn't fulfill the request, she said, watching my face. It didn't come through the proper channels and I didn't recognize the name. I wanted to mention it to you in case it was someone you'd authorized. I asked for the name. She showed me the email she'd received. Daniel Cho. His full name, his personal email address, written out clearly. I sat with that information for a moment, the way you sit with a result from a lab panel that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. I didn't authorize anyone, I said. Dr. Patel nodded. She printed a copy of the email and gave it to me. I folded it once and put it in my jacket pocket, and I drove home, and I sat in the kitchen again, listening to the house. This time the house felt different. I did not confront Daniel. This was a deliberate decision, and it is the decision I am most proud of in this entire story, because every instinct I had said to pick up the phone and demand an explanation. But I had been a physician long enough to understand the difference between the impulse to act and the wisdom of waiting. And I understood that if Daniel and Rachel were building something against me, the worst thing I could do was show them I was watching. So I called my attorney instead. Her name is Susan Whitfield, and she had handled my estate planning for 12 years. I told her what Dr. Patel had told me. I told her I wanted to review every document in my file, the will, the trust, the power of attorney I had established years ago. "Who did you name as your agent?" she asked. "Margaret's brother, Thomas. He passed away 3 years ago. I never updated it." There was a pause on the line. "Walter, if the power of attorney lapsed when Thomas died, and you haven't named a successor, you're currently without a designated agent. Anyone who wanted to challenge your capacity and petition for guardianship would find that door at least partially open." I asked her what I needed to do. She told me. I did it. Over the following 2 weeks, working quietly with Susan, I updated everything. I named Susan herself as Patel, as the person authorized to make healthcare statements on my behalf in any dispute about my cognitive status. I established a letter of competency, Doctor. Patel administered a full cognitive evaluation and signed documentation confirming that I was entirely sound, mentally and legally, as of that date. I put all of it in order. And then I kept having Sunday dinners with Daniel and Rachel and said nothing. In April, Daniel mentioned, casually, over pot roast, that he had a friend who was a financial advisor. "Smart guy," he said. "Really helped a lot of older people manage their assets more efficiently." "I'm happy with my current setup," I said. "Of course," Daniel said. "I just thought, sometimes a second opinion can be helpful." Rachel smiled. "We just want to make sure you're taken care of, Uncle Walter." In May, Daniel asked if I had ever considered moving somewhere smaller. The house was a lot to maintain, he said, and property values were high right now. It might be a good time to liquidate if I ever thought about it. "I'm not thinking about it," I said. In June, he brought a folder to Sunday dinner. He set it on the table beside the bread basket, and he said his financial advisor friend had put together some information about a managed investment structure that could, he explained carefully, consolidate my accounts for easier oversight. "Easier for whom?" I asked. He laughed. "For you, for everyone, for whoever ends up handling things if something were to happen." I opened the folder. Inside was a series of documents, several of them requiring my signature. One of them, buried on the 4th page under a section titled Administrative Authorization, contained language granting a named financial management firm, one I had never heard of, discretionary authority over my primary brokerage account. I closed the folder. I handed it back to him. "I'll have my attorney look this over before I sign anything," I said. His face didn't change, but his jaw tightened, just slightly, the way a hand tightens on something it's afraid of dropping. "Sure," he said. "Of course. No rush." I gave the folder to Susan the next morning. She called me 2 hours later. The financial management firm named in the documents did not appear in any state registry she could find. The language in the authorization section was written to be deliberately broad. broad enough, she said, to allow whoever controlled that firm to move funds with minimal oversight. Walter, she said, do you know if Daniel has any financial difficulties? I didn't, but I knew someone who might. A retired cardiologist who spent 30 years in a major hospital system has, over time, accumulated a particular kind of network, not powerful in the political sense, just wide. People who owe you favors, not because of anything transactional, but because you were the person in the room at 2 a.m., when what mattered most was competence and steadiness. One of those people was a man named Greg Holloway, who had been a hospital administrator and was now, in retirement, doing private consulting that sometimes overlapped with financial investigations. I called him. I gave him Daniel's full name, Rachel's name, and the name of the firm in the documents. Greg called me back in 4 days. Daniel had filed for bankruptcy protection 18 months before he first called me. He and Rachel had a combined debt of just over $240,000, credit cards, a failed business venture, a lawsuit from a former business partner. The financial management firm was registered in the name of a woman who was, according to Greg's contacts, Rachel's college roommate. The documents Daniel had brought to Sunday dinner were not a financial opportunity. They were a mechanism for transferring my money to an entity his wife controlled. I thanked Greg. I asked him to write up what he'd found. I told Susan everything, and then I waited for the next move. The next move came in July. Daniel called on a Wednesday morning, which was unusual. He always texted, never called. He sounded different on the phone than he did in person, lighter, somehow, more confident. He said there was a matter he needed to discuss with me, an important one. He wondered if I would come to meet him, not at my house, but at the main branch of my bank downtown, where he had set up a meeting with someone from their wealth management division. I'd rather meet at Susan's office, I said. This is just a preliminary conversation, he said. Nothing to sign, just information. I agreed to meet him. But I arrived 30 minutes early and asked to speak with the branch manager, a man named Kevin Torres, whom I had met twice before during routine business. I told Kevin I had reason to believe someone might attempt to use this meeting to present documents for my signature under false or misleading pretenses. I told him I wanted him to be aware. I told him I was a customer in good standing with substantial assets at this institution and that I was asking for his discretion and his attention. Kevin listened carefully. He asked a few precise questions. He thanked me and excused himself, and I watched him walk toward the service desk and speak quietly to the young woman standing there. Her name tag said Brianna. Daniel arrived 8 minutes late with Rachel, which I had not expected. She was dressed more formally than usual, blazer, heels. She smiled at me with the full performance of her smile. They introduced me to a man named Phil, who was apparently from the bank's wealth management division. Phil was in his early 40s, well-groomed, practiced in the particular art of projecting trustworthiness. He shook my hand and said he was glad we could all get together. We sat at a conference table in a side room off the main floor. Phil opened a folder. He began explaining, in the smooth, unhurried language of someone who has explained the same thing many times, a financial restructuring plan that would consolidate several of my accounts into a single managed trust. On page 3, I saw the name of the management firm from Daniel's earlier folder. On page 5, there was a signature line. "I'll need a moment," I said. I stood up. "I'm going to use the restroom." "Of course," Phil said. "Take your time," Daniel said. I walked out of the conference room and directly to Brianna's station at the service desk. She had been watching. She saw me come out. She leaned forward before I even reached the counter. "Sir, step away from the counter. Please, don't sign anything yet." And then, more quietly, "I flagged this account when Mr. Torres told me this morning. I looked it up. That management firm, it's not licensed through FINRA. I checked. Someone already tried to access your brokerage account online last week with incorrect credentials. 3 attempts. The system locked them out automatically, but I noted the IP address. We have it on file." I looked at her for a moment. She was steady, not alarmed, just firm. The way someone is firm when they know something important and have decided to say it. "How do we document this?" I asked. "Mr. Torres is already making calls," she said. "We need you to go back in that room and give us 15 more minutes." I went back in the room. I listened to Phil talk about managed trusts. I asked slow questions, the kind of questions a man of 67 asks when he is perhaps a little overwhelmed, a little uncertain, a little softened by the presence of his attentive nephew and nephew's wife. I asked Phil to explain the fee structure again. I asked Rachel about her weekend. I asked Daniel whether he thought it would rain before Thursday. 15 minutes, maybe 20. Then Kevin Torres knocked on the conference room door, opened it, and said he needed to speak with me privately for a moment. Phil started to stand. Kevin looked at him with a calm that I recognized immediately as the calm of someone who has already decided how this is going to go. "I'll need to speak with all of you in a few minutes," Kevin said. "But first, Mr. Grayson alone." What Kevin told me, in his office with the door closed, was this. The attempted account access from the previous week had been traced to an IP address registered to an internet service provider account in Daniel's name. The management firm Phil had referenced was not registered with FINRA or with the Ohio Division of Securities. Additionally, the signature on a letter of financial authorization that Phil had brought to the meeting, a letter supposedly signed by me 6 weeks prior, did not match the signature on file for my account. I had not signed any letters 6 weeks prior. I had not signed anything for Daniel, Rachel, or Phil at any point for any purpose. Someone had forged my signature. I sat across from Kevin Torres and felt, very precisely, the particular feeling of a thing you suspected being confirmed. It is not satisfying, exactly. It is more like the feeling of an X-ray coming back with exactly what you feared. The knowledge is clarifying, but clarity has its own weight. "What happens now?" I asked. Kevin told me that they were required by law to report the attempted unauthorized access. He said they would be placing a security hold on all my accounts, effective immediately. He said his compliance team would be contacting the relevant authorities. He also said, "Your account is protected. Nothing has been transferred. Nothing has been lost." I nodded. I thanked him. And I asked him to send Brianna in, just for a moment, so I could thank her as well. She came in with her hands folded in front of her, professional and a little uncertain. I told her what she had done mattered. I told her that the small decision to say something quietly to a stranger at a service counter had probably protected more than she knew. She nodded and said she was just doing her job. "No," I said. "You were doing something more than that." Daniel and Rachel were still in the conference room when the Columbus Police Department arrived. Phil had apparently left Kevin, said he slipped out during the few minutes I was in the manager's office, but Daniel and Rachel were there. And when 2 officers came through the door, the expression on Daniel's face was one I had not seen before. Not the measured smile, not the practiced warmth. Something stripped of all of that, bare and suddenly very young. Rachel said nothing. She looked at her hands. I did not stay to watch the rest of it. Susan had arrived by then. I had texted her from the conference room during Phil's fee structure explanation, and we drove to her office and spent the next 2 hours going over everything. The bankruptcy records Greg had found. The folder from the Sunday dinner in June. Dr. Patel's documentation of the unauthorized information request. Kevin's records of the failed account access. The forged letter. Susan said, "You've been building this for months." "I've been waiting for them to build it themselves," I said. "I just made sure someone was holding a camera." The legal process took 11 months. I will not pretend it was easy or clean. There were depositions and document requests, and days when I sat in Susan's waiting room reading the same page of a magazine 4 times without absorbing a word. There were nights when I lay in bed in the house that had been mine and Margaret's, and I thought about Daniel as a child, standing in the back row at her funeral, and I tried to locate something that felt like understanding. I couldn't always find it. Patricia called me in September. She was crying. She said she had no idea. She said she was mortified. She said Daniel had struggled since the business failed, and she blamed herself for not seeing how bad it had gotten. I listened. I believed her. Patricia is many things, but she is not a liar, and the weight in her voice on that phone call was real. "I'm not angry with you," I told her, "but I can't have this conversation right now." She understood. We have spoken twice since then. It is still uncomfortable. I don't know what our relationship will be when the dust settles. I am trying to leave that question open rather than close it prematurely. Daniel pled guilty to 2 counts of financial fraud and 1 count of forgery. The forgery charge, Susan explained, carried more weight than the fraud charge in terms of criminal culpability, because it demonstrated clear premeditation. He had not spontaneously made bad decisions. He had manufactured a document, placed it in a folder, and brought it to a bank with a man named Phil, who turned out to have his own legal complications arising from at least 2 other similar schemes in other states. Rachel cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced charge, a single count of conspiracy. She and Daniel had separated by the time her plea was entered. At sentencing, Daniel received 18 months in a minimum security facility and 3 years of supervised probation following release. The court also ordered full restitution for all legal fees I had incurred and issued a permanent injunction barring him from serving in any financial management capacity. I was present at the sentencing. I sat in the 3rd row. I did not testify. Susan handled everything, but I was there because I felt that I owed it to myself to be present, to see it through. When it was over, I walked out into a February afternoon that was gray and very cold, and I stood on the courthouse steps for a minute. Columbus spread out below me the way it always has, wide, familiar, a little tired at the edges, fundamentally decent in the way that Midwestern cities tend to be decent. I thought about Margaret. She would have found the right thing to say about all of this, and she would have said it simply, without drama, at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee between her hands. She had a gift for reducing complicated things to their essential shape. I miss that gift more than almost anything. There are things I wish I had done differently. I wish I had updated my legal documents the moment Thomas died, instead of letting years slip by with an unresolved gap in my estate plan. That oversight was not Daniel's creation, it was mine, and he simply found it and decided to use it. I cannot entirely blame him for seeing an opening that I had left open. I also wish I had trusted my instincts sooner. The discomfort I felt at that very first Sunday dinner, when Rachel called me Uncle Walter before I had given her permission, when Daniel smiled at things that were not quite funny, I noticed all of it, and I chose to read it generously because I was lonely and because generosity is usually the right instinct. Usually, not always. There is a version of this story where Brianna says nothing, where she leans forward and then pulls back and tells herself it is not her business, or that she might be wrong, or that a man of my age and apparent standing is surely capable of managing his own affairs without her interference. There is a version where I walk back into that conference room and sign the documents because I do not know about the failed login attempts in the unlicensed firm, because Kevin Torres never gets the chance to tell me. That version ends differently. Not dramatically, I would have noticed something, eventually. But later, and later, in financial fraud, is the difference between recovering everything and recovering some portion of something that is already gone. What saved me was not my own preparation, though that mattered enormously. What saved me was a young woman at a bank service counter who made a decision in a moment that cost her nothing except the courage to speak. I think about that often, how the whole elaborate structure, the forgery, the fake firm, the careful months of Sunday dinners and pot roast and patience collapsed because one person decided to say 3 sentences to a stranger. She was just doing her job, she said. I think that undersells it. I think what she did was notice. And noticing, when something is wrong, is not as common as we like to believe. It requires a certain kind of attention that the world does not especially reward or teach. She had it. It mattered. I have done several things since the sentencing that I want to mention, not because they are dramatic, but because they are the part of the story I find most worth telling. I have revised my estate plan entirely, with Susan's guidance, in a way that is now precise and unambiguous and thoroughly documented. The trust is structured to be resistant to challenge. The powers of attorney name 2 independent professionals rather than family members. Every account has enhanced security protocols. I am not invulnerable, no one is, but I am no longer casually accessible, and that matters. I have written a letter to my bank's regional management commending Brianna by name. I do not know if it affected anything. Kevin Torres told me, 6 months later, that she had received a promotion, though he was careful to say he couldn't confirm the connection. I choose to believe there is one. I have been in contact with the Ohio State Bar's Elder Law section about whether my case might be useful as an example in the materials they prepare for attorneys advising older clients about estate vulnerabilities. Susan has submitted a summary. If it helps one person update their documents before someone finds the gap, that is worth more than whatever satisfaction the legal outcome gave me. And I have begun meeting, once a month, with a small group of other retired professionals, men and women in their 60s and 70s who gather at a community center in Westerville for what we loosely call a discussion group, but which is really just an extended conversation about how to live well in this particular chapter. One of the men, a former judge named Harold, lost his wife 2 years before I lost Margaret. We have had 3 separate conversations about loneliness that I have found more useful than anything I have read on the subject. This is new for me, this kind of open, unstructured talking. Margaret used to say I processed everything internally to the point of inaccessibility. She was right. I am trying, at 67, to be somewhat more accessible, even to myself. I am telling this story because I think it needs to be told plainly. Not as a warning, exactly, though there are things worth warning about. Not as a triumph, though there was a measure of that too. More as an account of what it looks like when the mechanics of exploitation meet the mechanics of attention. When someone decides that an old man living alone in a large house is a resource rather than a person, and when that calculation runs up against the fact that the old man spent 31 years making consequential decisions under pressure and has not entirely lost the habit, I am not naive about what Daniel saw when he looked at me. I know what the combination of my age, my solitude, my assets, and my outdated documents looked like to someone in his position. I know the arithmetic he was doing every Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table while he smiled at my stories about cases from 30 years ago. I have sat with that knowledge long enough that it no longer surprises me, though I do not think I will ever find it completely unremarkable. What I am is clear about who he is, about who Rachel is, about who Brianna is, and Kevin Torres, and Susan, and Dr. Patel, and Greg, and Harold at the community center. About who I am, which turns out to be someone who is harder to take from than Daniel calculated, and lonelier than I admitted for a long time, and more capable of asking for help than I used to be. Margaret would have something quiet and exactly right to say about all of it. She would say it at the kitchen table. She would be correct. I am learning, at 67, to say things at the kitchen table instead of leaving them unsaid. It is, I find, considerably better than the alternative. If you are watching this and you have a parent, a grandparent, an aunt or uncle living alone in a house they own, I am asking you to do one thing, not for them, necessarily. For yourself, call your estate attorney. Ask your parent to call theirs. Find out when the documents were last updated. Find out who is named in the power of attorney. Find out whether that person is still alive, still willing, still appropriate for the role. Do this not because you suspect anyone. Do this because the gap between documents in order and documents out of order is the gap that people like Daniel spend their time looking for. Close it. Leave nothing open that does not need to be open. And if you are ever standing at a service counter, or in a grocery line, or at a doctor's office waiting room, and something in your gut tells you that the older person next to you is in a situation that doesn't look quite right, I am asking you to do what Brianna did. Lean forward. Say the 3 sentences. Accept that you might be wrong and say them anyway. That instinct is worth more than you know. I know because I was standing on the other side of it. And those 3 sentences are the reason I am sitting at this desk, in my own home, on my own 3 acres, in full possession of everything I spent a lifetime building, including, finally, a somewhat more honest relationship with the fact that I am 67 years old, that I live alone, that I miss my wife, and that none of that makes me less than I have always been. It makes me exactly what I am. And what I am, it turns out, is not easy to take from.